Actually, give me one second. Yeah, so hi Natalie. I just really wanted to thank you for taking the time to conduct, help me conduct this interview. So I think just to start, it would be awesome if you could introduce yourself, just generally like, you know, who you are, what your major is, and just things like that. If you could talk about yourself briefly, and then we can get into the specific questions that I have for you.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for having me, Riddhi. It's always a pleasure to reach back and talk to students. So I graduated from Berkeley this past May.
Mhm.
I was a bioengineering major. Um, yeah, I stayed that same major for all 4 years. I
Mhm.
went straight out of high school, and now I am in grad school. I just started my PhD at UC Irvine,
Mhm.
and I'm doing a PhD in biomedical engineering.
Okay. So I guess my first question to you is just sort of how you started to develop an interest in bioengineering. And I know you're really passionate about bioprinting, so how you were sort of introduced to that and how you started to develop interest in this field at all. And I was wondering if you were ever exposed to any of this while you were in high school, or is this something you sort of became attracted to after joining undergrad and after taking a couple of classes.
That's a great question. So yeah, we can start with how I got interested in bioengineering. I think for a lot of students that are interested in the STEM fields, we
Mhm.
often think about more traditional career pathways, such as perhaps going into medicine, either becoming a nurse or a doctor, a physician, or perhaps I mean, for me personally, I never really heard of bioengineering until I was applying to colleges. It wasn't something that I was okay, like when I apply to colleges, I'm going to do bioengineering, or I'm going to fulfill whatever requirements are necessary to do bioengineering. It
Mhm.
was more so I had wanted to be, or I thought I had wanted to be a physician. I was always interested by medicine and treating people, learning about disease and fixing that problem. But I soon realized that I was called towards something different. I wasn't as inclined towards going into medical school just for various reasons. And I realized that when I discovered bioengineering, you can help thousands of people at a time with the development of either a device, a
Mhm.
pharmaceutical, um, or a new rehabilitation treatment. And all of this is using a vast array of disciplines, so chemistry, biology, math, physics. And I think that really spoke to me. I'm someone who really enjoys doing a lot of different things at once. I think they often call bioengineers like, they call it like a jack of all trades in a sense. And that's a double-edged sword, right? You know a lot
Mhm.
about, or you know a little bit about a lot, but you don't really develop that specialization. So what I liked about, in high school, no, I wasn't really exposed to bioengineering per se, but we
Mhm.
had a pretty strong AP program. So I was able to do AP classes in chemistry, biology, math, and physics. And I think that provided like a very solid foundation for when I got to Berkeley,
Mhm.
at least being exposed to different topics. And then once I was in Berkeley, they have this cool thing where called concentrations, and you're able to basically focus on a specific subfield. So they had, I believe, 5 concentrations. So biomedical devices, synthetic biology, imaging, cell and tissue engineering, which is what I did.
Mhm.
And I don't remember if they had a fifth one. It might have just been 4. Um, but yeah, so those are the questions about bioengineering, right? And then you asked about bioprinting, or did I miss something?
Yeah, I asked you about how you developed an interest, whether you were exposed to this in high school, and yeah, the third part of that question was how you became interested in bioprinting in specific.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, that I really like yeah, how I discovered bioprinting. It was actually during I believe it was during Cal Day. So Cal Day,
Mhm.
they always have a ton of every college has a showcase of all the clubs and organizations they have. as well as the departments. And so they were happened to be doing a bioprinting club demo, and they brought
Mhm.
out the bioprinter, and they brought out a bunch of different hydrogels, which are essentially, if as you may remember from our lecture, are just the inks that are used for this printer. Uh,
Mhm.
and when I saw that, I was like, this is what I want to do, at least within my, like, I was so like, I didn't know much, right? But I was like, okay, I'm gonna like focus on this thing, on bioprinting. And so that showcase, just those people being there that day, I was able to get in touch with them. And the moment I joined and started my fall semester at Berkeley as a freshman, I joined the club. I applied to join the club, and from there on, I just stayed with it and I fell in love with it. And I hope to continue it throughout grad school.
Okay. Yeah, so specifically just sort of about bioprinting, I sort of wondered. It's an upcoming field, right? Would you say that?
Oh, yes,
Yeah, for sure.
definitely.
Um, so like what do you think actually maybe this is like me getting ahead of myself. Maybe I'll just so because we were talking about high school, maybe we'll finish that section
Okay.
first and then sort of talk. Okay. Um yeah, okay. So what were some things? So so you talked about how you had a strong AP program in your high school, which really helped you with college, taking courses, things like that. Um, what were some other extracurriculars that you were part of that sort of helped you figure out that this is what you wanted, or like still help you perform like well in undergrad based like it doesn't have to be academic, just like, oh, I was part of this community and it still helps me today in this. So if you could talk more about your like high school experience, I feel like it's relatable because the audience members are mainly high schoolers, so it's nice to also get more about that, and then you can also talk about your college experience and your future plans. So yeah, just about your high school experience.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think it's very important, because yeah, the things you do outside of school shape your character, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
what I did during high school is I played basketball for 4 years. So I was on the basketball team for 4 years, and I was in the high school marching band and symphonic orchestra or symphonic band, also for 4 years. So those are my main two extracurriculars. I hadn't really been doing a lot of clubs. I had joined, I believe it's the Key Club or Kianis, which is community service, as well as a club that my friend had founded, which was regarding just picking up trash in your community.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, yeah, it was an organized club, but I mean, you can just go out and do things like that on your own without being part of a club. But I think it's nice to have that community aspect, and the organized, facilitated events. But anyways, yeah, so my main things in high school were essentially school, basketball, and band. And I never wanted to sacrifice my own passions and my hobbies, because at the end of the day, I think they really like shaped me in the
Mm-hmm.
classroom as well. Like
Yeah.
anything I did on the basketball court, for example, like if we had a hard workout or a very intense, game, the way I recovered from that and learned to recover and cope with challenges in sports as well as band has been helping me to this day in terms of both undergrad as well as graduate school,
Mm-hmm.
because throughout your education, both in high school, but also as you enter to college, um, the only thing that won't change is that things will be hard, right?
Mm-hmm.
There'll be lots of different things, you'll be doing a lot of different subjects, but you will need to have a very good foundation emotionally of how to, approach things that you're having a hard time with. You have a growth mindset, which is basically telling yourself that just because you don't understand something now doesn't mean that you're destined to not understand it. Some, for example, some people can say like, I am not a math person, right? But that is not a fate that you have been assigned. That is something that you can actively change and work on. And the same thing for, basketball. Like, I can't dribble with my left hand. Like, no, you can dribble with your left hand. You just have to practice it every day, right? And so that translated very well into everything I do. And by no means I'm not perfect in the way I approach challenges. I'm still learning to this day, but I think for any student, yeah, that's listening, is don't think that you have to do something in order to achieve a certain dream, right? Like a lot of people are worried by what do they have to put in their application, or what do they have to do in order to pursue mechanical engineering or chemistry or bioengineering. There's no one size fits all. It's all about you, your story, and how you bring your strengths to the table. Uh,
Mhm.
so that's, sorry, a long-winded answer about what I did in high school.
Yeah, one of my questions usually is like towards the end, maybe I ask, the interviewees like what is one piece of advice they would sort of give to a high schooler or maybe themselves as a high schooler. Yeah, and you sort of talked about a lot of things that are actually pretty important for us to hear. So not at all, I enjoyed hearing you talk.
Oh, great.
I I think I also so for my next question, I sort of want to ask you about some other extracurriculars you're a part of at you were a part of at Berkeley, and just how the engineering program was, and just how your classes were and things like that.
Yeah. So I think I had for me personally, I didn't have a ton of extracurriculars. I
Mhm,
had bioprinting club was my main focus as a club. I was passively part of BMES, which is Biomedical Engineering Society,
mhm,
which is a social, I would say, I would call it more of like a social club that brings together biomedical engineering majors within the school.
mhm,
They host different events like professional development, but also recreational events such as game nights. Um, and I learned also, I was part of a committee in my freshman year where we learned how to work with SolidWorks, which is a computer-aided design software, as well
mhm.
as Fusion 360, but also Adobe Illustrator. So it was a very casual club. So bioprinting, BMES, and then I was part of a church group, and I did intramural basketball, and then I did my other big commitment was research. So research and bioprinting were my two main commitments. The other
Okay,
three were more so recreational, I would say. Yeah.
okay. Yeah, so if you could talk more about research, I think would be really interesting to hear about, like the work that you did. Yeah.
Sorry, can you repeat that
Oh,
first?
sorry. Yeah.
Apologize. I have some
Sometimes when
background noise.
I speak quietly too, it doesn't pick up my computer doesn't pick up my voice. Yeah. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about your lab experience
Oh yeah.
and just sort of what you did, because I think that would be interesting to sort of hear about.
Yeah, of course. So I joined a lab after my first year of college. So
Mhm,
the first summer after my first year, I started working in a lab. I had no idea what I was doing, but I found this lab that was in the cell and tissue concentration. It was the lab of Professor Irina Convoy at UC Berkeley. And she is a professor that focuses on aging. That is their specialty. They have this one classic experiment that they're known for where it's called parabiosis. And what they did is essentially it sounds a little like a sci-fi movie, but they sewed together two mice, essentially.
mhm,
They connected their blood flow.
mhm,
And what they essentially found is that if there's blood flowing from the old mouse into the young mouse gets older. That's kind of like what we would predict, right?
mhm,
There's but then the older mouse receiving blood from the young mouse saw signs of like regeneration, or they seemed to get younger, quote unquote.
mhm,
And so that kind of took off with their research. And so I entered their lab um, working on so I entered working actually on a cancer proteomics project, but I was focused on muscles. So essentially, how is the muscle tissue affected by cancer? And so essentially, like any lab you join, you'll learn a basic skill. So I learned how to culture cells. I learned how to analyze cells via fluorescent staining. I learned how to collect proteins from the cells, how to do antibody arrays.
mhm,
Uh, I know these maybe are words that aren't familiar with high school students or whoever might be listening, but
mhm.
you'll come upon them along the way. But essentially, I was just learning these basic skills. To be quite honest, I didn't really know what was happening in the lab until like couple months, maybe like 6 months, 7 months later, I started getting a gist of what is actually happening in this lab. Like, what are we researching? Because I was just so focused on the techniques and understanding the theory and the science behind, oh, why do the cells need this kind of media? Or why do they need to be held in a incubator at this 37 degrees Celsius, right? So
Mhm.
I think if just in general, like it was a very educational experience, and it's like drinking from a fire hydrant because you're just getting
Oh,
so much information at once. Um,
okay.
yeah.
So actually, I'm just kind of curious. I wonder how. So I'm sure there are quite a few of you like working on this project together. So like, how does that work? How does it get managed? And then how do you guys like delegate? You know, who does what?
Mhm.
And then who's putting together all of this information? I think it. I mean, it would depend based on
Yeah.
each um, research. Like, it would depend based on the research that's going on. But just generally, like, how was your experience? Because I have no idea, right? Like,
Yeah.
I'm
Like
just curious. Yeah.
of course, I think that's a great question. Basically, you have a PI or a principal investigator. That means like the head professor of the lab.
Mhm.
So you're the boss of the lab. And then the lab has these people called both graduate students, so PhD students, which I am right now, but they also have postdocs. And postdocs are people who have received their PhD and are hired by the professor as a very specialized scientist that is tasked with working on a specific project, right? To kind of enhance their resume. And so these are the people that usually undergrads work with, as well as senior PhD students, because younger PhD students are also still trying to figure things out. So they're usually a little bit more busy and not the best mentors. So when you email a professor, you join a lab, you're usually working with a postdoc. And that's what I did. I worked with a postdoc, actually two postdocs were working on the same project. This was the cancer proteomics project. And so while working on that project, I would literally just get emails. I would one ask the postdoc, you want to be like very active in the communication. So I would just
Mhm.
email them, hey, like, are you running any experiments this week? They would tell me, yes, come in on these days, or they would ask me what times I'm available. They would also send me some publications that I should read in order to understand the context of the experiments and what results we want to get. And then usually I'd be working with perhaps maybe depends on the lab, but this is like a general structure with like maybe one or three other undergrads that are
Mhm.
working on the same project, and we're in the beginning we're shadowing, and then towards the end, once the postdoc or the graduate student sees that we're able to perform a particular experiment with proficiency, then we're basically independent and we can do it by ourselves. We can feed the cells by ourselves, we can run the different assays by ourselves. So it's essentially just like a very like, they're holding your hand for the beginning part, and then towards the end, you can even get to the point where you're writing part of the paper or the publication. It's yeah.
Okay. Um, so I mean, okay, my next question is sort of moving away from this. I was kind of wondering why. So you go to UC Irvine, right, for
Mhm.
your postgraduate, or yeah, your PhD. Um, so why did you make the decision to go to UC Irvine? Is your next question? Was my next question.
That's a great question. So I mean, this could be a whole
Oh,
video
I'm
on.
sorry. Sorry for interrupting you. And yeah, if you could also add about why you chose Berkeley, that's also like
Okay,
yeah.
yeah. So when I first, we can start with the undergraduate degree. So I applied to most of the UC schools.
Mhm.
Um, I think maybe like one or two private schools outside of California. And then yeah, essentially I just wanted to go to UC Irvine. That was my goal. I was like, I live really close to UC Irvine. And I think that'd be a great choice. And then I applied to UC Berkeley just because a mentor of mine just like told me I should apply. I wasn't even going to apply because I heard it was very competitive, and I didn't really see myself going there
Mhm.
and fitting in. But I also really wanted to go to UCLA. So UCLA was like the dream school, so to speak.
Mhm.
UCI was like, I would just be grateful to go to get accepted to either of the schools.
Mhm.
Applied to some Cal States. But eventually I got actually waitlisted at UCLA and eventually rejected from UCLA, but I got accepted into UC Irvine, UCLA, and or UC Berkeley and some other schools.
Mhm.
But when I got into UC Berkeley, I was really surprised, right? And I didn't know what to do. I was still debating between UC Irvine and UC Berkeley, but a lot of people I was talking to were like, I mean, UC Berkeley is the clear choice, the clear winner. People hear of the school, it's very highly ranked, prestigious, but I think I wasn't trying to focus on that because I've heard from a lot of people, ranking doesn't matter. It's about your personal fit, your
Mhm.
personal
Yeah.
well-being. Also going far away from home, that was a really big thing for me that I hadn't envisioned ahead of
Mhm.
time. And so it was difficult, but I think going to visit the school in person was definitely just what helped me make the decision. The first time I visited, I didn't like it. I really didn't think
Yeah.
I would see myself there. It was a little scary. It was a pretty vibrant city. Um,
Mhm.
there's some crime there. It isn't the most clean. But the people I met there were fascinating and they were so passionate. And I think that's what really motivated me to go there because essentially when I think of Berkeley, it's like a intellectual playground. Anything you bring up to anybody, they will be either refer you to someone who is an expert and can help you with your idea, whether you want to start a company or whether you want to start a club. There
Mhm.
will be people that are always on board to help you. And throughout all 4 years, I really felt that the professors were incredibly passionate and they treated us like real, real engineers. They treated us like we have the power to make the world a better place. And because they believed that in us, we started to believe that for ourselves. So sorry, that's like long along the terms. But the reason I chose it is because of the people I met. And the way they talked about the school.
Mhm.
Despite the challenges that are very unique to Berkeley, I think um, that's what makes you who you become after you're a Berkeley student, and that's why people hire and really like Berkeley students, Berkeley engineers to work for them. Yeah, so that's essentially why I chose Berkeley. Yeah, and then
And then Irvine, I guess, is like close to home. Of course.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, Irvine definitely like because when you're applying to PhD programs, there's a whole different set of criteria that you have to take into consideration, and
Mhm.
uh, I mean, I know the audience I'm speaking to is probably not really looking at graduate school right now, but when you apply to graduate school, you have to take into a lot, like, because when you're going to PhD, you're working for a professor. So
Mhm.
you're not really choosing the school, you're choosing the professors at that school. So you can say that, Harvard and Stanford are great schools, but for example, when I looked at the faculty members at Harvard, at Stanford, and I looked at what their labs were doing, I realized it wasn't a good fit for me. And so you have to just really cater it to your research interests. And so I ended up choosing between Irvine and the University of Oregon, both of which I really, really like those schools. And I thought University of Oregon had a lot to offer from their bioengineering program. And I think for undergrads as well, it's a really up and coming program. Uh,
Mhm.
but a lot of personal factors ended up going into it. So, like you mentioned, it's really close for me to home. Oregon is very far. And I didn't want to spend the next 5 years again away from my family. I think I just realized, life is very fragile, life is short, and, you know, I can get just as an amazing experience at UC Irvine. Not to mention that there was professors here that were doing work that I really enjoyed.
Mhm.
And also I really like the weather here.
Yeah.
I so just things like that seem silly, but at the end of the day, when I talk to people, they're like, no, like these are the deciding factors for a lot of people. So um yeah, that's why I chose Irvine.
Okay. Um. Okay. So I think we're almost coming towards an end. I just have a couple of questions for
Yeah,
you.
no worries, no rush.
Um. I was wondering. So, like, what do you enjoy about bioengineering? What is fun, and maybe
Mhm.
what is sometimes challenging about the field that you're in?
Yeah. So I guess honestly, the challenge and the fun aspect are very similar.
Okay.
So I would start with the challenge. The challenge is that when you major in bioengineering, you are taking classes in a lot of different fields. You are taking classes in coding, you're taking classes in physics, you're taking classes in chemistry, organic chemistry, biology, not even that much biology, which is strange. We didn't take a lot of biology classes, but we just took a lot of applied and translational classes. So I think what was difficult is actually being good at all of those things. For example, over time, I realized that my strengths weren't so much in coding or physics, but they're more so in chemistry and biology.
Mm-hmm.
But I still enjoyed aspects such as material science. So I think the challenge is finding a way to find your niche within bioengineering. But at the same time, that is the beauty of bioengineering, and that is why I chose it, because you are not forced to choose a specific path. You kind of like have your own interests, and I had my own interests, and I was really interested in bioprinting, as I mentioned. And so I knew that, okay, I need to learn biology first and foremost, understand what it takes to recapitulate an organ, and then the second aspect was materials. What kind of materials can we use that very closely imitate the human tissue or in skin? And then chemistry. What factors do we need in that material? And what material has to be, what does it have to be composed of so that it doesn't like decompose while it's inside of an animal or a patient, right? So
Mm-hmm.
that being said, that's the fun aspect of bioengineering is you can just like create your own adventure. Basically, you kind of choose your own path, and you can learn so much. And the classes that you would take, whatever school you're at, you have so many options. It's very open ended.
Mm-hmm.
That's both scary, but I learned from older students than me, and they kind of advise me of what classes I should take if I'm interested in particular topics. So it's it's a great it was a great experience for me because I'm a very indecisive person, and I like being able to do my own thing. And so that's why I thought bioengineering was awesome. Yeah.
Okay. Um, so just lastly, I wanted to ask you what your plans for the future are. And I guess now you're just sort of trying to finish up your PhD, but like PhD beyond because there are so many things you could do in bioengineering, and like you were just saying, you sort of figure that out. So I was wondering like where you sort of fit in and what you're sort of envisioning for your future.
Yeah, and that is a question that I ask myself every day. But I do know that from PhD, you can kind of boil it down into two main directions. For me, I could either consider going into academia, becoming a professor, starting my own lab, or I can go towards industry. And at the moment, I'm quite set on going towards industry. I want to be a senior scientist, senior engineer at whether it's a big tech company or perhaps even an up and coming company like a startup. I would love to work on a project that involves perhaps a bioprinting system. But if not a bioprinting system, then just some way to recreate tissues for patients that have various pathologies, such as, whether it's a heart condition where they have a stiffening of their heart tissue or scarring of the skin. I want to work in a company that, aligns with the research I'm doing now.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but there are a lot of different avenues. I wouldn't mind being a consultant. So basically, companies ask you, present a certain technology to you, and then you kind of report based off your experience. Oh, this is a good idea, but you need to fix this and that. So industry and potential consulting for companies, but also nonprofits.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So actually, one last question. I also
No
wanted
problem. No problem.
um, I was wondering what your PhD was on. Like, what are you doing right now?
Yeah, that's a great question. So right now I'm in my first year. I'm actually in my second quarter. And
Mm-hmm.
so what that means is I'm taking a lot of classes.
Mm-hmm.
But while I'm taking these classes, I'm also rotating in a lab. So last quarter, I rotated in a lab that was very interdisciplinary. They worked with material science, but they also worked with themselves. And so I worked on a project that was basically using a material that changes color when basically in response to stress. This material changes color. But we wanted to use that idea and
Mm-hmm.
use it with heart cells. And we want to see how those heart cells affect the color change of that material. Basically, the idea is to create a device that is able to show you how strong the force is being output by these stem cells. stem cells that come from human patients and can be used for drug testing. So basically a very interdisciplinary lab. And now I'm working and that was only for 10 weeks. So I haven't chosen a lab yet.
Mm-hmm.
In the spring, I will officially commit to a lab. I will get like quote unquote married to a lab and a PI, and I will have a home for the next 5 years. And from there, I will have my PhD thesis. But right now I'm working more on a immunomodulation related project where we're working with macrophages, which is an innate immune cell responsible for clearing up your wound sites, but they're also very important for long-term wound healing. So I'm looking at macrophages in the context of atherosclerosis, which is the buildup of plaque in your arteries.
Mm-hmm.
So we want to understand how we can turn off the pro-inflammatory response in macrophages that cause them to create this plaque buildup, in a sense, and inflammation. And so understanding the biological pathways behind signaling between cells, but also understanding how tissues reconstruct. So honestly, both labs and fields of research are very interesting to me, but I will have to make a choice in about 5 weeks. So that's in a nutshell, like what I'm doing now. I don't really have something I'm working on concretely for the next 5 years, but I'm happy to follow up on that. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I really, really enjoyed talking to you today. I learned
Likewise.
so much. And you talked about a lot of different things, and it's so interesting to sort of talk to you. And of course, I'd love to hear more about what you decide to do and everything. So I just want to thank you for your time today, and just doing this interview with me, because when we hear about all of these experiences, it really helps high schoolers just think about we don't have to know what we're doing, but it's so helpful to have an idea on what options we have and everything. So I want to thank you for your time and just all your thoughtful responses to this.
Yeah, of course, Riddhi, and I just applaud you for doing this for this as a biology.
Biomed, yeah. So we have a Biomed Academy at our school. I think it's like freshmen to seniors. I think we have about 400 students. Um,
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, our school is pretty large. It's like 3,000 people in total, and we have an engineering academy, a biomed academy, and they're actually really great. So when you're a junior, they also pair you with like if you're interested, they pair you with a mentor in the community. It's a
Wow.
lot of like hands-on labs. It's actually really fun. Like it gives. I think when I applied, I also did band when I was in middle school.
Uh-huh.
And I've always liked math, physics, like a lot of different
Yeah.
things. But my mom studied botany when she was, as her major, and then she didn't get a PhD degree. She had something called an MPhil.
Okay.
But I hear a lot about like the work that she did, and I've always had this like connection with biology, so I applied. And just being in the academy, I've been exposed to a lot of different things. I've talked to a lot of different people, and I just felt like it's helped me so much personally. Just because my parents are pretty educated, but they didn't finish their education in America, so I didn't
Mhm.
know what AP classes were going into high school.
Right.
I didn't know a lot of, I didn't, like navigating high school itself was a trial and error process, let
Yes.
alone like undergrad or, beyond that. So for me, I've always found it really helpful to talk, or I would sign up for all sorts of classes. I would sign up for different guest speaker meetings, and I always like enjoyed hearing about everyone's experiences because it was all so diverse and everyone was so passionate about what they did. So I really enjoyed it. I thought for my project, I would sort of, compile this as a resource, talk to different people. And of course,
Wow.
like yeah, I feel like I'm not the most like social person, but,
You seem very social. You're a natural
not,
at this.
not in real life. I'm pretty reserved, but I feel like
Yeah.
I can make conversation. I get along with people, but I feel like I learn from talking to so many different people, and hopefully,
Mhm.
like people, if they're interested, they could look at these videos, and they could learn more too. So I really thank you for your time, and just everything that you like talked about today.
Of course, I am so grateful that you reached out. I'm honored to have been a speaker with you and do
Mhm.
this interview. And please feel free to email me if you have any questions. If the students have any questions about my journey, I'm always more than happy to share and just offer any advice that I can because I know how important it was in my personal journey. So yeah, just
Yeah.
whenever you need anything, feel free to email me.
Okay. Thank you so much.